Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined, as always, by my dear friend and co-host, Dion. How's it going, Dion?
Life is beautiful. Life is still beautiful. We're still breathing.
We're still breathing, we're still here, and we're back with another episode. And this is the beginning of a new series, one that I'm really excited about because we're going to be diving deep into our exploration of the Gothic subculture and all of its related avenues. And this is something that's kind of near and dear to both of us, even though we don't necessarily appear as people who'd be so into goth. But on your side, Dion, you grew up in LA at the moment when goth hit, when glam turned to goth right there in the early 80s with Christian Death and the whole death rock scene. So this is your youth. And for myself, my introduction to a lot of the occult and magic was through romanticism and my love of romantic literature. And so I've always had this obsessive kind of love for Edgar Allan Poe and Mary Shelley. And this has always led into the Gothic stuff and the poetry. So we both have this kind of interesting connection here. And we really wanted to dive into the Gothic subculture because it's so intimately connected to the mystery, specifically the Luciferian tradition and the left-hand path, right?
Yep. The occult, vampires. I would dare to say that Gothic music and death rock was an introduction into the vampirism and that whole world.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like, you get Anne Rice in the 70s, and then you get The Hunger with David Bowie, then Bela Lugosi's Dead, and goth and that vampire thing kind of submerge into this wildness. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. And we're doing an interesting episode today because we're going to go backwards. So one of the things that I thought was really fun when I was talking to you, your presentation, you're actually going to begin with the advent of the goth subculture, at least the modern goth subculture as we see coalescing within the Bat Cave and the F Club in England. And then we're going to go from there and explore all of the roots.
Yep. And we'll go far back. We won't go back to the 15 and 1600s, 1700s. That's for next week when we explore early vampire myths, the Vlad Tepes, Wagner, the opera, even Gothic revival. There's a lot to explore. And as well, we'll get into the modern versions of what happens in modern times, what happens in the present moment with Twin Temple and Vampire Weekend, and where are we going now with Twilight movies.
Right. Goth is bigger than it ever has been. It's more mainstreamed. And the interesting thing that I also find about the Gothic subculture, unlike, for something like punk rock or heavy metal, where they're so tied to a specific genre and they're so tied to a very specific ethos, it becomes limiting. Whereas in goth, it's such a freewheeling culture, and it's so fashion forward that it winds up infiltrating every aspect of music and subculture. And it seems like it just keeps having consistent revivals. Every once in a while, someone gets into it. The macabre is truly human. And this is one of the things we want to explore here, right? There's always been this fascination with death. Like, an interesting comment you made before we went live here was just that, we have that, it's the other side of the mystery. We have the expulsion of life, the beauty of the virgin, right? In the right-hand path, which is that moment of absolute bliss and transcendence. But that perfection only ever exists for but a moment. That blossom is only in its height for but a moment. And then the rest is decay. And we have to wrestle with that decay until we get to the ending of death or the experience of the orgasm, where you have that similar explosive experience. And these are so deeply tied into the left-hand mysteries.
Well, you said orgasm. I thought somebody said that means the little death.
Absolutely does, right? Well, that's what they call it in French, le petit mort, right? And it's that idea, right? Everything stops in that moment. You enter into that transcendent state of nothingness, right?
And you'll notice in a lot of the goth literature and the surrounding subculture is romance with the dark side. It's seductive.
Absolutely.
And so that's what this is. A lot of this is about, because I'll talk about people that are not necessarily goth, you'll see, but they have a connection to the dark side, a seductive connection at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we get in, Dion, talk to us a little bit about your experience with goth, and then we'll get into the Batcave and begin your presentation. So you were there. People want to know, what was it like being in the 80s in LA?
15, 16-year-old wearing spider webs, sneaking out and into clubs, and they would let underage kids in. Oh, that's wow. Part of the thing. There is a dark side, though, to all this. I will talk about that. Some of my favorite artists have a dark side as well. I'm just saying. But yeah, we'd be wearing spider webs and cobwebs and black outfits and sneaking out and going to see these bands. 45 Grave, Christian Death. LA had its own, it was called death rock. It's the goth in England, death rock in America. It's the same fascination with all black and, the dark side.
Right. Same kind of, you're pulling from the same places, though it's slightly different. It's like punk versus hardcore, right? Hardcore was the LA and punk was the UK, but they're ultimately one thing at the same time, right?
And it's a cathartic release. If punk was cathartic and about getting out some of that energy, right. we have this emotions inside, and how do we let it out through music, a static dance and ritual that has changed over the years. We don't have the mystery rights, so the music becomes the mystery right. And punk turned on that, had that element. And then post-punk is what we'll call goth or darkness. It's after that, when it's more of a I'll let you explain it.
Well, we have this. Okay, so we got to think of the punk scene in the UK as this. Number one, you have this youth. You have all of these youths with no work, nothing to do, completely destitute, right? This is a really hard time in the UK in the 70s. And at the same time, you have these radical subversive actors. You have people like Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren, who he had originally worked in New York with glam bands, specifically the New York Dolls, which were transgressive, pushing gender boundaries, pushing lyrical boundaries, but drugs ruined that. And he came back to the UK. And so a lot of the punk scene is this combination of, one hand, you have these high artists, reactionaries, right? People who are trying to throw shit in the face of the establishment. And then on the other side, you have literal street kids, right? Who are just trying to survive and have no support, and there's this serious anger and frustration at the way things are. These two things coalesce in the Sex Store, and it produces the Sex Pistols. The angry youth hook up with the weird artists, and the Sex Pistols are born, and this sets a massive explosion of youth culture and reactionary, because now all of a sudden, the youth are put forward. This is seen as their expression. They're wearing safety pins because their clothing is ripped and they only got one set of clothes because they're on the street. They're wearing plaid because that's their school uniforms, which they're subverting. This is all this intense reaction, and it causes this huge burst of just creativity that spills over across the globe. And we're still feeling the reverberations of that today. But out of that anger also comes this extreme reactionaryism. Part of the problem with the Sex Pistols, in my opinion, is that they are this reactionary. Like, they're shouting anarchy, but it's for the sake of spitting on people. They're wearing Nazi armbands, not because they're fascist, because they want to offend people and attack people. And this is that kind of ethos. So what ends up happening is it inspires all these youth, but the youth are immediately kind of confronted with what punk is, and punk becomes this kind of elitist thing, and there's this ultimate reaction to it, and that's where post-punk is born. Punk didn't go far enough. Punk is too caught up in the reactionary. Punk is too corporate. It's too artist. It's not authentic. And what you start to get is, you get these really interesting art kids in the UK who had gone to technical schools, who had really, the first punks, like the Sex Pistols, outside of their bassist Glenn Matlock, none of them really played instruments. Their music is simple because they don't know what they're doing necessarily. But by the time you get to Bauhaus and Joy Division, it's simple because that's what they want to do. And this is a part of an aesthetic ideal, right? They're looking to the art that came before, like Impressionism and Distill, and all of this radical subversive culture that was existing in Europe, and they're incorporating it. You know, it becomes really intellectualized. In America, you get bands like Devo, you know, De-Evolution, all this stuff. But this is really where post-punk starts to come in. And you get goth kind of comes out of that post-punk scene. You get people like Joy Division, but it really begins as a musical thing with two bands, right, in my opinion. Bauhaus and, of course, Susie and the Banshees, which I'm sure you're going to get into. And there are many other bands and whatnot, but those are the ones that break the mainstream, that really garner public attention and change everyone's opinion, for goth specifically. Now, Joy Division is kind of interesting because they're new wave, they're goth, and they're punk. They don't really fit anywhere. You could also kind of lump Joy Division in here, but Susie to me is the quintessential goth. If I'm going to think about goth, it's either Susie or it's Catwoman. You know, it's those fashionistas from the London scene, and that's really where it kind of coalesces. But it comes out of that punk reaction. It has this street element, the youth element, but it's no longer into the reactionary. It's kids doing their own thing. You know, like Bauhaus talks about recording Bela Lugosi's Dead. They do it in one take. And it's largely them just having fun and riffing on stuff, you know? Bela Lugosi died and he's Dracula. Isn't it ridiculous that he's dead? You know? And they're dressing up and they're just having fun. But it becomes something so much darker and more explorative, right? Because also Bauhaus, and they're kids, but they're also artists, serious artists, deeply read in philosophy and art and aesthetics, you know, and they're taking all of that and they're applying it. It's both fun and kitsch, but it's also serious and wild at the same time. And that's what makes goth so radical, that it can be kitsch, can be ridiculous, but also deadly serious, you know?
Saturnian satire.
Right.
You know? Well, let's hit the first pick.
Right.
And get this journey going.
Get the journey going. Oops. Okay. Where we go.
The Bat Cave. That's a good place to start at. A club in England, London, 1982. There's so many of these bands that we could talk about, from Sisters of Mercy, Specimen, Alien Sex Fiend. Alien Sex Fiend, Nick Fiend actually worked at the Bat Cave.
Oh, wow.
And where did he come from? He evolved out of a Alice Cooper cover band.
That's interesting.
And it's the same elements. Alice Cooper, we'll see later. That's goth is about a relationship with the dark side, with the Saturnian satire, poking fun at the dead while embracing your own mortality at the same time. Susie and the Banshees, you mentioned Sex Pistols. Well, during that whole highlight of the Sex Pistols making the come up, Susie and the Banshees was there in the background.
Yeah.
She was on the TV shows. She was a fashionista. She had this look, and she would bring her friends with her, and she was part of not necessarily a groupie, but a tribe. She brought an element. And then finally she said, well, I'm going to do this too. They did a performance where they just improvised music, and she did the Lord's Prayer for like 20 minutes. And that was her first. She's like, oh, this is fun. She took to it.
Wow.
You know, you have The Cure, Robert Smith, and eventually they put out an album, The Batcave Crew, and it's a compilation. And that kind of sets that moment kind of sets the tone, meaning that there's been this before, this movement, but that immortalizes at that moment. It puts the blueprint. It says what it is. Like, this is Gothic music. We wear spider webs, all black. There's some kind of cathartic release, a relationship with the dark side, and it's satire at that. So let's hit the next image.
Yep. It begins here with the Batcave, you know, and the Batcave also was, before it was even a club, it was a club night, right? And it started out as new wave and glam rock, and it sort of became goth in the moment, right? It was founded by that band, I'm trying to remember, Specimen, I think they were called. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. And we also want to highlight, this wasn't the only goth thing happening in the UK. There was also the F Club and some other things. But as you pointed out, it's that compilation, the Batcave compilation, and I think it's what, 1982, 1983, that hits, and now everyone is recognizing Gothic rock as its own specific kind of thing, right? So really, and this is, yeah, so this is, by this point, we say that goth is now its own distinct subculture. So from here, we're going backwards. Right?
Yep.
All right, so from here, we're going backwards.
And Susie, we talked about Susie, had a natural look. And it mixes BDSM, medieval, Victorian vampire clothing, morning wear, Victorian morning outfits, punk rock, all thrown together in just a wild look. Even incorporates foreign elements. You could have Asian elements, Indian elements. That's part of the sub nature of it. Let's hit the next image. And you said Bauhaus. Now Bauhaus puts out an album. Bela Lugosi's dead, and the music is not necessarily. It mixes dub. It mixes a lot of different sounds together.
It's so wild, right? It's very quintessential of that late 70s, early UK, right? It's incorporating punk, post-punk, and reggae, which are all the hottest thing at the time, and dub, right? Dub reggae. But it's like a 7-minute extravaganza, one take of this weird kind of dub rock, but it has this sinister tone. And I honestly think this is one of the greatest songs ever written. You know, it blows my mind every time I hear it. And yeah, it really sets the stage for what goth is in terms of that goth rock sound.
You know, what I like to say though, so this is 1979. The year previous or after this, 1980, was when a book came out that was called what's it called? Michelle Remembers. And it's where the satanic panic movement kind of begins. In 1980, this book comes out and she remembers all this satanic abuse, and she eventually ends up marrying the psychiatrist that helped her, you know, graft all these stories. And in that same year, Venom comes out. I don't know if you know the Venom album cover, Welcome to Hell. It has a pentagram on it. And
hey, that I have a personal relationship with that. When I was young and I was still involved in Christianity, I remember going to an HMV, seeing that record and being terrified, thinking that I was going to get killed by the devil. And now like, then you read about Venom and they're teenagers, you know, being ridiculous and just having fun. Like, come on, it's fun stuff. Lay down your souls to the God rock and roll, right? Like it's not the black metal that is into that satanic stuff that comes much later, you know, that depressive suicidal stuff, right? Venom are just dudes having fun. It's great rock music, you know, but to 12, 13-year-old me, it was terrifying.
Yeah, I remember when it first came out. My buddy, when I'm 12 years old, my buddy, his family owned the local record store in town, in Head Shop, and he had every album. He had the Venom poster, and I remember like thinking, should we listen to this? Being scared,
right?
And he's like, he turns it up louder, like, and so they like that stuff. And there was a satirical element as well. But I just want to throw that out there because that's at the same time goth is blowing up. There's satanic panic. It's like you have Geraldo Rivera and there's people going on there and talking about witches, and Michael Aquino's going on TV talking about witches and all weird stuff. And so there's an element of that. But so we're at 1979 right here. Go to the next image. At the same time that they're doing the Batcave and Bela Lugosi's dead, in California was Christian Death and 45 Grave. And this is Roz Williams right here, you know, as a bride of Satan or the devil. He eventually committed suicide, unalived himself. And he was into Christian themes at that, dark Christian themes. Half the songs talked about weird biblical stuff, and this was called death rock. They didn't consider it wasn't called goth, it was called death rock. That was the term that they used back then. Go to the next image. And here's 45 Grave. And look at it, they have a coffin. They would bring the little coffins on stage, and they're kind of punkish, kind of gothic, kind of it mixes those elements together. People might be slam dancing a little bit.
Right.
The vampires having a little fun. But I want to show you during this time frame, let's say 78 through 80, there's this movement of 10 to 15 iconic bands that set the tone. Go to the next image. Misfits.
The gods of horror punk, right?
Yeah, and they're 77 when they first came out.
76. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're right there. They're wearing eyeliner, vampires, and they're obsessed with 1950s vampire movies. It's right. Satirical at that, but it rocks. There's something still edgy about it, even though it's satirical. And they wore these little hairdos. You see how they're like the devil lock, yes, because the devil lock will feature in this episode several times.
Oh, you're gonna go back to Elvis, aren't you?
I'm just saying. I mean, come on. There is a continuity and thread of this darkness, this Asterion satire. So let's hit the next image.
Wow.
The Cramps, the gravest hits at that. Yep. It's rockabilly, but it's dark.
Yeah, but the Cramps are right there at the absolute beginning of it all, right? And goth and rockabilly, again, this is one of the interesting things about goth, because it influences all these things. Rockabilly, psychobilly, right? It's that fusion of rockabilly and goth culture, and it becomes its own thing. It's like subcultures within subcultures. Is it punk? Is it goth? It's all of it, and it's its own thing too. Right, it's interesting. You get all these micro scenes within the goth movement. Any kind of subcultural music, it seems goths would pick up, do their own little niche spin on it.
Well, if you have a relationship with the dark side and you can make it fun and seductive, then hey, let's go. The bass player, Poison Ivy. So there's a fun element to it. Let's hit the next pick. All right. I wanted to throw this in there because David Bowie, a lot of people won't necessarily consider him goth, but Ziggy's pretty gothic.
Ziggy, you have to, you kind of have to because of the hunger. But is he a goth artist in terms of music? No, but The Hunger is one of the quintessential vampire movies, and his look as that white androgynous, vampire, it's one of the most seductive images, and you see countless artists rip that off. And we also have to talk about, right, where it's so much of goth is coming out of glam. It's a reaction to glam. It's a hardening of glam in the same way that, you see this with subcultures all the time. And we need to talk about this because it features heavily within this kind of story. But you see this with where punk becomes hardcore, right? Takes on an angrier, darker side, or mod becomes skinhead, takes on an angrier, darker side. Hippie becomes heavy metal, takes on an angrier, darker side. Rockabilly becomes psychobilly. It's always this kind of, the thing starts and then a more edgier element of the subculture takes root and separates off a harder, tougher, more, subcultural dark element. Even within goth, you get vampire and you get the more BDSM related subcultures, Yeah.
Well, I would dare to say that Ziggy touches on that all. Spiders from Mars.
Of course, you got to mention the New Romantics, which come out of which come out of glam. And the New Romantics are interested in a lot of that Edwardian fashion and the Victorian fashion that then becomes staple within the goth scene.
Yeah,
So all of these are influencing each other.
Visage. I'm reminded of, you know who Visage is?
No.
In Adam Ant and the
Right,
guy
right. Adam
Steve
Ant, the New
Strange,
Romantics, yeah.
and Steve Strange from Visage used to manage some of these clubs at the same time that helped define the British culture. But let's hit the next pick, because I'm curious if I included a picture of the Damned.
We do have the Damned, I think, but I'm not. Oh, I forgot to include them. I forgot to add that picture in. I'm sorry, but we have the Damned, or it didn't get updated.
Oh, okay, so that means we'll be missing a few picks.
I can. I got it. Let me just 1 second here. I'm gonna re-upload because I did add those in. It must have been taken from an earlier version, so it'll just take me 1 second here. I wanted to talk about the Damned while I bring up the picture.
Well, talking about Sex Pistols, 1976, the Damned had a single out first, and it was produced by Nick Mason of Pink Floyd.
Oh wow!
And the Damned, eventually, it becomes 1980. There he is, right there. Dave Vanian is his name, like Transylvanian Dave Vanian, the Damned.
Right.
And they're weren't always gothic, but it's a sub element of them. And then finally in 1980 they came with the album called the Black Album, and he's gothic. You could see it. You could. Dave Vanian from Transylvania of the Damned.
Right. Well, we do, the Damned are hugely important, as you said, arguably one of the first punk bands along with Sex Pistols and the Ramones, right? And New York Dolls. All this gets really debatable. MC5, right? You're starting to Iggy Pop. You're arguing, slight variations, but they're there at the beginning and they rock. And you're right about the goth thing, because they take the image in that direction. Really, really cool stuff.
Yeah. They don't necessarily
identify Peter Gabriel.
Peter Gabriel.
Even the like Pink Floyd and the prog guys were getting into some of this weird stuff, right?
And Peter Gabriel's a chameleon,
huge, right?
Chameleon. And I'm sure all these kids, Susie and all them, Peter Gabriel's, they're elder. He's a couple years older, and they're seeing this. They're seeing Peter Gabriel on TV wearing weird outfits and shape-shifting, and Peter Gabriel's like a method actor. He would embody these characters. If you know about Peter Gabriel Genesis, and it'd be thematic. Each song would be the story, and he'd wear this outfit. And
well, this is the big thing that people forget about Genesis, because so much of it was unrecorded, but they were most famous for their live show and for these ridiculous costumes, and it would be new costumes always, and they would see often this kind of radical proto-goth type imagery.
That's funny you said proto-goth, because that's what the picture's description was. This is Peter Gabriel wearing proto-goth outfit. It's just a seductive relationship with the dark side. Let's hit the next pick. So I was showing you David Bowie. All right, now Kiss Army at that, the Army of Darkness. Dressing up as demons, spitting fire, wearing bondage gear. They may not identify as goth, but it's that element and satirical relationship with the dark side is there. And
but they're quintessential for so much of this kind of stuff, right? You do not get what becomes the corpse paint of black metal without Kiss. Bands like Immortal directly cite Kiss and are Kiss obsessed, right? And all of this we got to acknowledge, and that whole rock and roll kind of Lemmy side as well, right?
The first time I wore eyeliner as a young man was playing dress up with Kiss. I remember being 10 years old, and we're recreating it, and I remember everyone wanted to be Gene Simmons. Like, they would argue over gets to be Gene Simmons.
Oh, that's gross.
He spit fire.
Right.
It was crazy, and the music is playful at that and weird. So and a lot of these people are accused of being satanic. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but a lot of them are more capitalists, I would say. They're capitalizing on it.
Certainly Kiss is capitalist with the Kiss Army, but the Kiss army is a huge, you know, when they're coming out, subculture, youth culture is really just starting to truly blossom as a lot of conservatism is being pulled back and is no longer being maintaining the same holds as on the youth, right? So by the time you get to the late 70s and 80s, it's, you know, you get the real blossoming of this, and they're one of the instigators with the fan club. They had the biggest fan club in the world in the 80s.
Like, an army.
Yeah, a whole bloody army.
It's called Kiss Army.
Right?
The
All
army of darkness.
Wearing their makeup and their big spikes. And of course, that translates into so much goth, into so much music, into so much aesthetics, right? And, you know, Kiss is coming out of the glam, but then they influence black metal, right? You know?
And this is a comic book. They had comic books. They had toys.
They had everything. They do everything. You know, and just like the Misfits, that's one thing that you see with a lot of these imagistic bands who are into the, you know, like both Kiss and the Misfits became these corporate machines. You know, you can buy the Fiend skull from the Misfits on literally anything.
Yeah, and there's kids that wear it in modern times. You go to the store and you could just adopt your style. You could walk in, if you want to be skin, you have your bomber jacket and your Doc Martens. If you want to be emo, you can pick it out. And there's a rack of your clothing, and you can wear your little patch that identifies what music you listen to, and people know what you're about. Oh, you're angry, you're emo, you're cathartic, you're happy. You know, we know what you are by your patches, your cuts.
Yep. Unless you're called out as a poser. Unless you don't have the right cut. You know,
right.
The right shoes. This is where you get into that gatekeeping elitism, you know?
Right. Well, let's hit the next pick. Because this person was there too at the heyday of all this. 1970s, early 1970s, Alice Cooper. Shock rock. They had to give it a term. They're calling it shock rock. He's wearing eyeliner and darkness, and it was just comical. Part of it, it's satire. That's what a big theme is with this dark relationship is satire. And
absolutely. You know, and it's what's interesting about Alice Cooper is that it's clear satire with him. He's a deeply evangelical religious man, you know, and all of this is for jokes. And I've seen interviews with him where he's talking to kids who are like into black metal, and they're coming up to him and they're taking it serious, and they're getting them to sign his autographs. And he's looking at them. He's like, dude, none of this is serious. What are you doing? What are you doing?
No, I know. Even, yeah, you know, we'll see. A lot of them are really have a weird relationship behind the scenes with it.
You do get a lot of the occult stuff, which we love and we're going to get into, but we also have to acknowledge for some people, it's just performance. You know, for Alice Cooper and Kiss, it's pure performance, you know?
And maybe they get it a little, they feed off the negativity eventually because they do. All right. So even David Bowie, Alice Cooper, Kiss, most of the crew have a problem with underage girls on tour. To say they get away with it. And there's a certain element of, like, say, Robert Plant wearing that shirt every night of the girls, the conquest from the previous night. And that's why the shirt's so tight. He wears the lady's shirt from the previous night. They're coming onto the band, but there is a certain element of them taking advantage of their fans.
Yes.
And it's been documented. It's not I'm not talking about the natural concert experience where everyone's just screaming and excited and who's know what's happening. But behind the scenes, you'd be surprised what they get up to. You know, Marilyn Manson wasn't the first one doing this stuff. You know, they were doing some wild stuff. They feed off it. Like Billy Idol throwing TVs out the window at the hotel into the pool. Most of his money went to damages.
It's so funny to me when you look at someone like Billy Idol, because, you know, it's funny you bring him up because he is largely the original poser, because he left Generation X and became a boy band and packaged punk and sold it to America and made it to the top 10. He was like the least authentic punk ever, you know, by the time the 80s rolled around. But at the same time, he made his millions and did the Rebel Yell and the White Wedding, and, you know,
it was fun. White Wedding.
But people who grew up with Generation X are like, dude, you're the biggest sellout of all time.
Right,
what the hell? You know,
because that's because a lot of punk is earlier than people pick up on it. We got it because we got to see punk as a 70s thing. Not people see it as an 80s thing, but it's our 70s punkers that set the stage for a lot of this stuff. They're you know, so let's hit the next pick. I want to talk about Blue Oyster Cult a little bit. They're not necessarily Gothic, but they have a relationship with the cult.
They are what you call, I talked about this briefly. So we'll get into this because this becomes a major theme. Within the hippie movement, by the mid 70s, you start to see well, in the early 70s even, you start to see this grand divide between the peace and love hippies and the acid exploration hippies. And the acid exploration hippies start to evolve into what becomes occult rock, right? And then that becomes heavy metal with bands like Black Sabbath, you know, who are sort of where the imagery, the occult imagery meets the heavy blues. And then but we have these occult rock bands that don't have that heavy blues yet, you know, and Blue Oyster Cult has to be discussed because they're one of the first quintessential kind of metal bands where that blues turns metal, and they have the imagery. Like, look, I wonder if you're going to get into this, but their symbol is an upside down version.
Go to the next image. There it is.
Yeah.
And they're already promoting this weird occult symbols. I mean, do I gotta be a Freemason or a Kabbalist to understand this? Right. It can go to the next image and we'll see where it's from. That's where they're taking it from.
It's the Saturnian cross. Well, there's actually a really great deep dive on YouTube about this I watched recently. I just want to plug that channel if I can find it here. Oops. What was it called? But anyway, if you go Google it, there was this guy who did this really great deep dive where he explores the origin of the Blue Oyster Cult symbol. But there's clearly a lot of this esoteric occult element to it, you know, really, really interesting, you know, and these things are provocative, right? And also when you're dealing with the symbolic, remember, it's not always what the artist intends. It's the impact the symbol has on the psyche of the public. And you're playing around with this, you know?
Like some of it, they're making fun and it's satire, but when I'm 15 on acid in my bedroom, you know, freaking out, I think it's serious, you know?
Exactly. When I was 12 and I saw Venom, black metal, I thought that was serious, and it's not at all.
Yeah. So let's hit the next image because this will help define that. All right. So here's Esquire magazine, 1970. They came out with the album cover. Talking about can you read that for me? What it says on the cover?
It says, "Evil lurks in California. Lee Marvin is afraid." Why is Lee Marvin afraid?
Yeah, he's talking about evil lurks in California because at this time there's occult rock, there's Coven, there's the Manson murders.
Right.
Cults are going popular. You got Blue Oyster Cult. All this stuff is happening in heavy metal, in cults, in darkness, and Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley. And they're figuring out, like, hey, there's something happening here. So much so that some of the cult bands after this kind of tampered it down a little bit. Like, oh, we don't worship Satan. No, it's not part of it. It's like, it was just because they started attacking some of them, even like Black Sabbath. Like, go to the next image. Like, I want to show you this guy real quick before we go to Black Sabbath and the other guys. This is Arthur Brown, who performed on TV in 1968 for the BBC with the flaming helmet. So imagine 1968 BBC. Some of these are little kids are seeing this stuff, and these are your future rockers, your punkers and death rockers and stuff. They're seeing some of these people because I want to show that there's an element going back to the 50s and 60s.
Gets it from, right? Like we're talking about Kiss earlier. Where did Kiss get it from? Clearly, right?
And he actually lit the thing on fire on stage. He could have lit his head on fire.
I saw an interview with him where he talks about he got it from Screamin' Jay Hawkins. You know, it's always everyone is always inspired by someone else, right?
Exactly. Next image. So we're talking about the Satanic Panic of 1970. occult rock and using symbologies. This album comes out in 1968. It's Satanic Mass by Anton LaVey. Puts out an album.
I've been shredding keyboards.
Yeah, so yeah. We'll go to the next image. There he is. There you go. That's him. Go.
Yeah.
He was a church organist before he got into this stuff. And so that's his, if you listen to it, you'll be like, what is this, ice skating music? The Satanic Mass? But it's the imagery. It's the imagery. It's what it represents. Yeah. It's that foray into music and occult in the dark side. And it's satirical. That's how you get away with it. Because if it was real, then they would shut you down.
We've talked about LaVey quite a bit. You told me that in his house in California was literally painted black, and he walked around in public with the tiger.
Well, that was it. Yeah, in San Francisco, he was famous for doing weird stuff. Like he was already a celebrity even before he made all these albums and stuff. For being a weirdo,
but yeah, for just being eccentric.
And he was hanging out with Sammy Davis Jr. and a lot of different people and they're seduced by this stuff. Yeah. And especially in the 50s and 60s, it's more fun. Let's go to the next image. See, I want to talk about Black Sabbath a little because with this occult rock stuff and the album cover and that Satanic Panic that came out after the Manson murders. See, Black Sabbath distanced themselves from that stuff. And Black Sabbath is accredited to doing the Baphomet, throwing up the Baphomet first.
Well, that gets the beat of, Gene Simmons claims it. Ronnie James Dio of Black Sabbath also claims it.
Coven
claims it.
Yeah, Coven was messing about before them first, and we'll see why. But I wanted to show you this picture to show you that early Black Sabbath, even the name Black Sabbath, because they were influenced by, what was it? What's his name? The books. Oh, it'll come to my mind. He was reading occult horror books too. Dennis Wheatley novels, which are very influential in the cult. Notice they're wearing crosses.
So with Black Sabbath, right? This is really important because Black Sabbath is where heavy metal is born, right? This is where the occult imagery meets hard blues, right? And it becomes one synonymous thing where you get the evil and the heavy. Prior to this, you got like the Beatles do that song, She's So Heavy, where you're starting to see the beginnings of what would become doom rock. Really simple breaking of amps. This is really already happening prior to Sabbath, but they kick it up a notch. They kick it up to an 11, right? And they take the imagery of Coven, where, like, I know you're going to get into Coven because we talked about it, but Coven is really they are the most quintessential occult rock band. They had all the imagery. They even had a song called Black Sabbath. Prior to calling Black Sabbath, they called themselves Earth. They were a hippie blues band, But they, after hearing Coven, they adopted this. Geezer Butler talks about this, who's their main lyricist. He wanted to create imagery that was terrifying. We're afraid of the devil. We're afraid of all this stuff. And they talk about how, like, those big crosses were given to them by family members.
That was the father of Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah, he worked at a metal factory, and he made them all crosses because they thought they were cursed. And one of their performances they were going to do, they got into it with some local hippies that were witches in England, druid types, and they cursed them and said, fuck y'all. Oh, sorry for cussing. And Black Sabbath, they thought they were cursed. They went home and put on their crosses. Daddy made crosses for all of them.
Right? When you listen to their lyrics, like, they're either talking about fantasy, talking about drugs, or they're talking about running from the devil. The devil is out to come and get them. There's no loving of the devil. They're still very much a hippie band, They're even more toned down than what Coven was, who came out a few years earlier, But they don't have the heavy guitar Coven. Coven doesn't have the blues rock,
Right. So it's England in the 60s is a certain fascination. So let's at the next image. 1967, 2 albums come out. Sgt. Pepper's. The music is not Gothic. There's nothing about that. But we have a peculiar person in the personage that's in the photo there of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
There's a relationship with that. It's subtle. And these outfits, they're colorful, but they're still there's something that happens. It's called the 60s folk revival. And people go back to wearing the old outfits. They start wearing the medieval outfits and the Victorian outfits. It's part of a look. But the Beatles explored darkness. And like you said, She's So Heavy.
She's So Heavy is like one of the heaviest songs ever written. It still holds up. You know, when they recorded that, they took a massive fan and had it play throughout the background of the entire song, just so that you feel that wall of sound. And you remember, like, this is before any heavy metal, you know? And it's wild to hear that. And the Beatles do not get enough credit for being defining in that chase for heaviness. Helter Skelter, right? Yeah. Helter Skelter was written as a reaction to The Who, because there was this whole, The Who heard the Kinks and they got to be louder. And then the Beatles hear The Who and they got to be louder, right? Well, and it just keeps going until eventually you get Black Sabbath.
And who uses Helter Skelter when they murder somebody?
Right.
That's Manson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's that subculture. And that's why when Manson's writing Helter Skelter on the walls, that's when they start putting out articles like, hey, what's going on here with the music industry and occultism and kids? Like, we need to put the brakes on it a little bit. Go to the next image. What's the name of this album? In Defense of Their Satanic Majesty's Request. 1967. If you told your father, can I buy that? You're not buying that. And once again, they have that same look. They're reviving the old fashion.
You know, the Stones, okay, not enough is ever said about the Stones, especially about Syd Barrett. Syd Barrett is one of the most influential cultural figures in terms of all of this occultism, all of this magic. A true radical who really pushed that whole acid guitar thing to the next level, right? Also, who is the other guy? Oh, sorry, not Syd Barrett. Sorry, the guy in Black Sabbath. What was this? Or sorry, in Rolling Stones. Who's the guy who died in Rolling Stones?
Brian Jones. Go to the next image. Watch. Go to the next image, and we'll see him.
Brian, you know, Brian Jones is so important because, like, they're also sorry, I meant Brian Jones. I got caught up reading the text here. I'm saying Syd Barrett. I meant to say Brian Jones. Brian Jones. Here we go.
But hang on. Syd Barrett. So, you know, when the Damned recorded their first single, they tried to get Syd Barrett to produce it, but he was out of commission by that point from all the drugs and all the stuff. That's why Nick Mason of Pink Floyd produced the Damned's first record, or that first single, because Syd Barrett was too messed up, but they still wanted him to do it anyways, because they had a fascination with Syd Barrett. As Dave Vanian, that was his inspiration, let's say.
Right. But yeah, this kind of stuff, though, Brian Jones, right? To understand the full impact of Brian Jones, you've got to look at the Temple of Psychic Youth. There would be no Genesis Peorage in the Temple of Psychic Youth without Brian Jones. A lot of that radical stuff that Genesis was playing in, and a lot of this free art in radical music, began as people who were fangirling over Brian Jones.
and once again, Brian died a mysterious death in the swimming pool. Brought back these fashions. He was like Syd Barrett in that he was a person that was eventually, all right, you have someone whose creativity is so turned up, they have a hard time functioning in regular life. So drugged out, but they got this high level of creativity that's influencing the rest of the folks until finally they either put you in a mental institution, or you die, or you burn out, you OD or something. But you can see he's playing the not his harpsichord, but his piano, wearing the old fashions, because that's as part of this is about, is this Victorian, Edwardian, medieval fashion sense that creeps up into fashion. It brings back the old aristocratic look of what vampires used to be aristocratic. That's part of it. Let's hit the next image, because I want to show you. All right, these are called teddy boys. This is the image of the teddy boy movement. You know, if you want to talk anything about that.
Yeah. So the teddy boys, okay, they arrive. So much of early British subculture is based around obsession with American and other foreign records that they're bringing in from the empire. You know, mod is all about jazz. Teddy boys are all about, well, also about reggae and ska, but they're about, you know, those records. And Teddy Boy is all about rock and roll. It's all about getting into that kind of stuff, you know? So it's really, really interesting stuff. But the Teddy Boys are all about that kind of rockabilly fashion, but with a UK twist, you know?
And they have Edwardian coats, velvet creepers. So they take rockabilly from America and mix it with Victorian Edwardian fashions, and you get something that's unique. And they like to fight. They want to fight with the mods.
Yep.
And they have their devil lock sometimes. It's not called a devil lock then, but it's that rockabilly.
The rockabilly thing.
And
yeah.
And
So,
part of this fashion informs what goth is in modern times. You'll see the people, the creepers and the Edwardian robes.
This is also the beginning of what becomes tribal war within the subcultures, right? Because the mods and what become the hard mods, the skins, hate the teddy boys, and what becomes the rockers, the harder teddy boys, the guys who ride the motorcycles. And these two crews go crazy beating up each other, right? But also most of this is blown out of proportion by the media to the nth degree, where there's a whole like industry of manufacturing fear about youth gangs, right? And it becomes this whole thing, mod versus rockers, to the point where people are still talking about it to this day. The Who make a whole movie on this, Quadrophenia. But that whole creating a subculture, creating a tribal identity, and then going to war, this becomes a whole big thing. You see that later with the punks and the goths, you know? This is a huge deal.
Yeah. And I wanted to just show you that not only the culture that informs punk, but the fashion that informs the goth.
Yeah.
It's Edwardian robes, velvet creepers, rockabilly fashion sensibilities, and you just put a little angst on it and it goes all black.
Yeah.
Let's hit the next image. You know, because there was a fascination in England of that time with Aleister Crowley, with Hammer Films. That's why Bauhaus is singing about Bela Lugosi, is because Christopher Lee, Hammer Films. It was big.
Big in the 70s.
A renaissance of occultism coming through these movies.
Yeah, we got to talk, because there was that huge kind of occult horror type of film. Like the quintessential to me occult horror would be, what was that one? They did a remake of it with Nicolas Cage.
Oh, that's The Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man is like the quintessential occult movie, and that's pure 70s camp. You know, you have this uptight Christian guy who goes to this, you know, island where the people are all practicing their hippy dippy peace and love paganism, but it turns out it's not peace and love, and you're the outsider.
Burning Man. It's Burning Man's become Wicker Man. As of this couple months ago, the last Burning Man, right at the moment of the burn, somebody sacrificed somebody and slit their throat. So it could be a Wicker Man type event. And that's because things that are even supposed to be camp and spiritual and satire, people take it too serious and take it too far. There's people, like we'll see in our next episode next week, there's people that have things implanted. They read Anne Rice books, and we're going to see why and how they do this. This is part of how we end up with that, with Twilight and all that stuff in modern times. So let's go to the next image, because there's Aleister Crowley's part. Look at that look. I mean, that's Black Sabbath. That's Gothic right there.
And why we need to talk about Crowley, especially in this, is because he was so versed in controversy and exploited this to the nth degree. He purposely drove the tabloid media, right? And he used this as a way to get attention. He called himself the Beast 666. Now, to people interested in occultism, we understand this. He's connecting with Helios, right? He's connecting with the 666 from the Greek tradition. This is a huge, beautiful, magical thing about helping Attis achieve enlightenment, you know, the beast that Lady Babylon rides upon. But to the Christian uninformed, that's the evilest shit you could ever say, you know?
Yeah.
And Crowley is relishing in this kind of controversy, relishing in it. And he's allowing people to take his words and run with it and not correcting them, you know?
And they were fascinated by him because they let the cat out the box in the 60s with acid and Jimi Hendrix and what have you. And some people got into the dark side of it. And it was always been there. You'll see it in pop culture. Let's go to the next image. All right. I wanted to show these guys because they're kind of gothic early, before a lot of people were in all black singing about BDSM and weird subjects.
You have to talk about the Velvet Underground. You have to talk about Lou Reed, right?
Even the name Velvet Underground comes from a BDSM novel. Venus in Furs is about BDSM. Right. And they had Andy Warhol. And once again, Andy Warhol used to go to church every day. He's obsessed with Christianity. There's some people that are still obsessed with Christianity behind the scenes. And that's what drives them to have this counter.
Someone like Andy Warhol, I'm not a big fan. So take my opinion take what I'm saying with that in mind. He was a voyeur. He was a gawker. He liked to gawk at the weirdos and wanted to be on the outside looking in, maintain this kind of Christian elitism. You know, he was a deep self-loather. He hated his homosexuality. He hated his weirdness. And then what did he do? He exploited his friends. He took all these people, he brought them into his world and ripped them off. And then he mass produced all this art and made billions and sold it for commercial garbage. Andy Warhol's a weird mother.
Well, he corporatized avant-garde. He corporatized what is avant-garde, and it's supposed to be dangerous and against the grain. He's like, oh, I'll throw a price tag on that. I can see something happening. And so, but the Velvet Underground themselves are kind of gothic, and the subjects they talk about. It's in darkness and heroin and
we have to point this out because this is a real important point for pushing, the whole underground music scene, right? They were an independent rock band talking about radical subject matter. Anyone who got these albums was influenced and went on to form bands and to produce. In the same way that anyone listened to the Ramones picked up a guitar and went, I can do that. You know, that's the kind of influence they had.
Except if you pick up a guitar and want to do what Lou Reed does, you have to put it into an alternate tuning, which is mystery rite music. We're going back to ancient Greece and ancient India, where alternate tunings produce these effects and put us into trance ecstatic states, and using repetition at that. Like you said, Joy Division wants to be simple for a reason, because of Velvet Underground. It's that same, and even the word Joy Division, if you know what that comes from, that was a name that dealt with the war of a...
Well, yeah, exactly, right? They're talking about the Nazi, the Nazis had a whole division of prostitutes who would go and service the men who were these enslaved women, right? Who were taken from the battlefield. And that was the Joy Division, But if you're going to talk about the Bauhaus is really great, because what is Bauhaus? If we're talking about the simplicity, Bauhaus is a artistic movement in a school in Germany of architecture, but it's all about that absolute simpleness. And they're really like post-punk, right? They're coming at that from abstraction. And these are people who are really interested in surrealism, Distill, the abstract art world, cubism, and they're translating these ideas into music. And that's what makes something like Bauhaus so radical. On one hand, they are these aesthetic philosopher art kids. And then on the other hand, they are these nerdy geeks who are just having fun and singing about Bela Lugosi. It's both camp and deadly serious, right?
And I would dare to say that Bauhaus was influenced by Peter Gabriel and David Bowie and Velvet Underground and Alice Cooper. And how could they not? How could you not be a young kid seeing that and go, ooh, I want to do that?
Right.
Seeing the guy light his hair on fire on TV when you're like 10 years old, you're like, ooh, I want to do that, mommy.
Absolutely.
Let's hit the next pick, because this is these
Moving
next
on.
couple bands are to me the quintessential. They started.
Yeah.
This band right here throws up the Baphomet in 1966. They have sacrifice and symbols and pentagrams. They sing about witchcraft and satanic stuff, and they record a black mass. This is the first recorded black mass. They
And also,
literally.
what's different between them and like Black Sabbath, who's clearly influenced by them, they're celebrating, even though they're destroys minds and reaps souls. They say that the lyrics are all positive about witchcraft.
Yeah.
You know, they're
Yeah.
celebrating it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like running from the devil. No. This is a bit different, a lot darker.
They're embracing the ancient mystery, right? And they bring it to you intact with the symbols, the sounds, the imagery, everything, the outfit, the Baphomet. And you know, and I want to know why. How'd they get into this? And it's part of it is their producer, Bill Trout.
I know, this is so wild that you found this. I was
like, yeah. And so how did they come up with the name? All right, so Bill Trout, who helped produce them, had a record label called Dunwich Records. And it's based off the Dunwich Horror, which is H.P. Lovecraft. And
this, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. And so he was into H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of them were into it, like heavy. They had like a little cult. Because there's some people that take Lovecraftian lore as it's not real, but that's kind of like real. A grimoire. It's a grimoire that can do things.
Almost, we got to take it about in a very literal sense. So, okay, this is a huge, important defining line in the Thelemic religious tradition. So after Aleister Crowley dies, you have two major figures who come about in Thelema. In America, you have Carl Bremer. Okay, he becomes the leader of the OTO. And in the UK, you have Kenneth Grant, who was the personal secretary of Aleister Crowley. Now, Bremer becomes sort of the head of the order. And what ends up happening is Bremer and Kenneth Grant have this massive fight. Why? Kenneth Grant has this revelation while reading the books of Lovecraft that Lovecraft is channeling the same beings that Crowley is channeling, that all of this Lovecraftian mythos can be overlaid onto the Book of the Law. And he wants to explore this, and he believes that this is huge. Bremer freaks out over this, and he hates this. He doesn't want Thelema to have anything to do with H.P. Lovecraft or horror or fiction, you know? So this becomes this grand separation to the point where Kenneth Grant declares himself the head of the OTO and tries to steal the organization from Bremer. So Bremer incorporates in the US and kicks out Kenneth Grant, and Kenneth Grant has to change the name of his order to the Typhonian order of the OTO, you know? And their big separation is about Lovecraft. And can you take the Lovecraftian mythos and overlay it onto Crowley? Now, this is something that gets really wild in terms of weird tales and all this stuff, you know, because like I've talked about on my other show with Graham, Clark Ashton Smith, another mystic who's writing in the Lovecraft mythos and is engaging a lot of this kind of Now, this guy knows the ancient Greek, and I am certain is a dragon based upon his poetry. When you read his poetry, this guy is so deeply interconnected with the mystery rites. And I'm uncertain how connected he is to Thelema, but he was deeply involved in Lovecraft. Same thing with August Derleth, is another one of these weird tales writers who's also deeply proficient in the mysteries and is exploring this mystery tradition. And when you read H.P. Lovecraft, I can see why Kenneth Grant jumps to the leaps that he does. It is not that grandiose of a stretch when you're dealing with the mythopoetic, right? And if you're dealing with these abstract symbols, you can easily see how some of these abstract gods of Lovecraft can become Horus, the child, can become Osiris, you know? I don't think it's a leap in logic at all. I think honestly that it is kind of the natural exploration that happens when people are engaged in these high forms of meditation and explore. The muse takes you wild places. Everything is a reflection of everything else. And you will find the mystery reflected to you in whatever you're engaged in. And, H.P. Lovecraft was certainly a visionary, a deeply racist weirdo, but someone who had a magical vision that many people latched onto. And the Lovecraft mythos is so much grander than him. And it has become a legitimate religious tradition. And that cannot be denied. And Coven is playing on all of this. That producer, all of these people, they're all in this occulted milieu. This is all happening in California too, right? Even though Carl Grammer is trying to distance himself from Lovecraft and the fiction side, you do get, right, like the most famous American Thelemite is, what's his name, who blew himself up?
Parsons.
Parsons was deeply involved in science fiction, deeply involved in this kind of stuff, and in the horror world. So all of this is kind of blending, Yeah,
the horror movies, the sci-fi movies, it does blend. That's why I throw David Bowie in there as Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars, because there's an sci-fi element to it as well. Let's hit the next image, because they also produced another album, Dunwich, the crew there, and it's called Lovecraft. That was the name of the band, was called Lovecraft. And this is a psych rock album in the 60s that a lot of people never heard of. It's the blueprint. It's showing you what they're about. Trying to take the occult and turn it into music that someone can listen to and embody that energy. It's like a working spell or a sigil, a mantra or yantra, you could say. When they're doing that, he saw that in his mind. That's why they recorded the Black Mass.
Right.
Let's hit the next image. All right.
Our Devil Lock. I knew you were going to bring it.
even before the Devil Lock, you had the Monster Mash. You had Bobby Pickett in 1962. Bobby Pickett and the Crypt Kickers. They did the mosh. You did the Monster Mash. It was a graveyard smash.
Right.
That's right. Because you're dancing in the graveyard. Who dances in the graveyard? That's as goth as it gets. And
Adam's
here,
family, right?
yeah. And here, there was this whole pop horror satire movies of the 50s was big. So like here, look, we have Elvis. He's with right there. That's Morticia. I mean, Vampira.
Vampira, okay.
Yeah, go to the next image. And you can see where the Devil Lock. He has the Devil Lock. That's where the Misfits got that from.
Right. They're so obsessed with Elvis the Misfits, it's ridiculous.
And here's the Ghoul Gang, Vampira's Ghoul Gang, established 1954. And you can see Elvis was in it. Elvis was in the Ghoul Gang. Right. Elvis, he was into the cult. Is just Priscilla at one point, she burned all of his books. She took all of his occult books and burned them. No more Ghoul Gang. Go to the next image. Here's Elvis with Morticia from the Addams Family. They did a movie together before she came Morticia. Go to the next image. There, oh yeah. So between Vampira and Morticia, we have that's where Elvira gets it from. But I'm pretty sure Bauhaus and Susan the Banshees, they saw Morticia and Vampira on TV and go,
mainstream mass culture, right? American mass culture. It made its way to the UK, no doubt.
Yeah, and so this is where I see goth culture being informed by it.
Absolutely.
Black and white 1950s. Go to the next image. Here's a record that came out, Endless Sleep. And the guy's name is Jody Reynolds, 1959. And this is called death rock. That was the name of the genre. They called it in 1959. They go, this album is death rock.
And it's on Demon Records.
On Demon Records with the little demon on top. The Demon Music Group, it's hard to find much about. I tried to find so much about this record label. Zero could find about them. From California, the Demon Record Group. So Jody Reynolds, in his song Endless Sleep, it's about his girlfriend who commits suicide in the ocean. And the ocean is calling to him to join him. She's calling to him from death to join him in death. and it's really slow and creepy. And they're like, this is death rock, 100%. And he put out another song called Black Tarantula.
Okay.
On Demon Records, 1959. And they called it death rock in the press because it's depressing and he's talking about depressing subjects, but it's seductive at that. And he has the devil walk, a little devil walk, that little rockabilly thing. So let's go to the next image. All right, this is my last image right here, because this is the progenitor of a lot of this stuff. Screaming Jay Hawkins, 1956, the song I Put a Spell on You. On stage, he will come out of a coffin.
As a voodoo priest.
And he's wearing eyeliner. And he's talking about putting spells on you. He's considered the progenitor of goth.
He is the originator of shock rock, certainly, right? You do not get Brown without him. And, you know, Brown is where that stuff really takes off, right? But like, this is the guy who took, well, we also got to talk about the earlier blues stuff, because he comes out of the dark world of the blues. And the blues, right? He takes that evil, satanic element of the blues and makes it satirical. The story goes that originally he was recording I Put a Spell on You, and they didn't like the clean take. They didn't like it. And he was getting frustrated. They kept making him record it again and again and again. And then finally he just started screaming it after he got shit-faced. And that's the version they decided to use.
Yeah, I heard, what I read was that he got shit-faced, was screaming in the booth. He didn't even remember it the next day. He blacked out. And they go, no, we're going to use that version. We like that version because he was channeling at that point. He was blacked out and he was just expressing the chaotic, archaic, static, cathartic. It's and putting it onto record and putting it onto the vinyl record is magical in itself, that you're pressing sound onto these little spinning record that's spinning at that. It's so Saturnian. And what he was singing about drove people wild. This is where you have all these other artists seeing this and going, woo! Like, what's up with that? And they banned them. They tried to ban it. You know, a lot of this stuff I didn't mention, a lot of these artists that we've been talking about are banned a lot of the times, you know, that you can't listen to that. We're not going to play that. That only makes people want it more because now it's taboo and forbidden.
Becomes taboo and forbidden. And what is also, especially in America, what is more taboo and forbidden than a black man, right? Who's coming at you singing about magic, right? Like this would have been truly shocking to an uptight white audience, right? You got to put yourself in that mindset, as gross as that is, but that's the world that he's coming out of, you know? And we also got to recognize that blues is a reactionary music. It's a reaction to slavery. It's a reaction to oppression. And it comes out of that African diaspora. It comes out of this intense resentment and anger about their situation. And so much of that music is deeply connected to folk magic and self-empowerment and resisting of the system, rejecting of the status quo, you know, empowering yourself with that satanic imagery, with the drugs and with the sex. You know, a lot of these men who are recording blues are itinerant farm workers with nothing. They got no life, no anything. All they care about is their next meal, and they're playing their guitar just to bloody survive, right? That's the world that's just before him, you know?
And you said it's about folk magic. I remember one of our previous episodes, folk magic is insurrection.
Yep. Absolutely.
100%. And rock and roll is insurrection. It's folk magic. Yep. And so I was trying to find, who are these original musical artists that put on the trappings, put on the outfit, embody the Dracula, embody the Saturnian, and have the skulls and just embody it. And you could see there's a continuity. And so in our next episode, we'll go farther back. We're going to get into Nosferatu and Vlad Tepes and Dracula and how that all
Byron, Mary Shelley.
Yeah,
we're going to get into all of it. You know,
because somebody's always influenced by somebody else, and Wagner is going to be part of it. The Flying Dutchman, this how can we capture this darkness into art? How do I put it into a painting or a poem or a song that resonates and passes on that cathartic, seductive darkness to somebody else?
Exactly, right? It's really
and who are
about that
these dragons?
exploration
They're
of the dark.
dragons. You call them dragons, and these are dragons that can take on this. And are they bats? Is that what they are? If they're from the bat cave, they're bats. Who are these bats through history that can shapeshift? And originally, it starts with writing, though. The oldest way we can go back is to writing, and then we can have paintings, and then we use paintings a lot because artists can put a lot of double meanings and symbology into their paintings, especially like the Renaissance and the cult paintings and everything that's going on. So that's the first goth stuff there until we can get recorded music. And before recorded music, you have classical music that's written down. And that's where you can get some, and that's where they come up with something that's called the devil's interval, the tritone. The church wants to ban a certain chord.
Well, I mean, a lot of that has been, blown out of proportion, but, everyone knows that the tritone just sounds bloody evil. And if you go back, everyone, listen to Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath and just sit in that tritone and feel the evil, feel the heaviness, right?
And they're getting that. And who translated that into culture first? And part of that is Wagner. These classical composers that are dark. Because Wagner, in the next episode, we'll see he was into philosophers. He had he was into something. Because I was like, well, what is Wagner into? How's he getting this? He was reading dark philosophy. And
he's so much into the classics as well, right? He's all into this classical stuff and recreating myth, like the opera, the ballet, classical music. This is as esoteric and mystical as you get. This is the height of Western culture. And it's kind of I'm not saying like it's greater than any other aspect of culture, but so much of our modern society has kind of snubbed this. So we view it as untouchable or unexplorable or, as something that is, over there and for the rich. And it's like, there is a wealth of information that you can gain by exploring this. And there's so much power there. Right. And it's open for anyone who can read. So,
So as our next episode, I like to remind people now we're going back into the literature and the ancient books when we had printing presses were invented and when we had classical composers, because that's the Gothic work. That's the death rock. That's that seductive.
Libertine, right? We're going to talk about these libertine tendencies, this breaking free of the cultural norms, that subvertive left-handed stuff, right? It blossoms in so many different ways, right? There's some really wild stuff. So much of that satanic panic stuff is it's happening multiple times throughout history, right?
Yep.
Remember, we talked about what was that guy who wrote Là-bas, right? Down there, all about the French satanic stuff. And then that gets translated by A.E. Waite. And then 20 years later, that starts another satanic panic. People reading A.E. Waite out of context and blowing it, it's so wild how this shit happens.
A.E. Waite and Margaret Murray's books at the turn of the century become manuals. They're kind of, what's the word? Embellishing on it and making it much more than it is, but it sounds so juicy that Gardner and Crowley go, well, I'll turn that into a religion. Like, that looks good. Like,
well, there is some legitimate stuff there too,
right.
Like A.E. Waite is the nerdy Catholic nerdy esoteric Christian who doesn't fully understand the occult. That's why Crowley dismisses him constantly. And if you read his books, like, he tries to hide, I can't explain the full meaning of the symbols because I've sworn oaths. I don't necessarily buy that. I say you're just writing in hack poetry and don't know what you're talking about, A.E. Waite. This is the thing. There are so many better writers than him. He wrote on a lot. He's hugely influential. His tarot is the most important tarot of all time, but his legacy is kind of gross overall.
And he's informed by the satanic panic coming out of France. That informs a lot of his goth culture. It's the French literature that's into Satanism and witches and vampires, and they have a literature renaissance of the darkness. And that informs pop culture for the next 100 to 200 years. This movement.
Yeah. And Wretch, our buddy Wretch, brought up Alpheus Levi. We definitely need to talk about Levi, because all of that French occultism, right? And so much of this reactionary satanic panic is with him, right? The drawing of the Baphomet, his history. You know, we do have to talk about A.E. Waite, because he did translate Alpheus Levi, and his translation is still the standard translation for Alpheus Levi to this day. You know, and that's what really, in my opinion, makes A.E. Waite important, that he translated Levi, not what he actually did.
Well, he's a channel. He's a channel.
Right?
Like some of these people, they're against something and they channel it. It's you're either for it or against it, but you're still channeling it. It's embracing the dark side. And so that we all got that in us. It's a natural element. And like we said at the beginning, this ritual that we're talking about, this cathartic ritual, this darkness, it's one half of the mystery rite. The first half is spontaneous expression,
that light birth the virgin. But then the second half is death, the setting yourself on fire, apotheosis, orgasm.
Permanent decay. Once we're born, we're in a state of permanent decay.
Right? Once you're, that's true. Now we're in that state of falling apart, ever striving to go back to that virginal blossoming that is ever lost, right?
And so the Gothic culture, part of that is embracing that. Like, it's embracing the dark, embracing your own death. Because we're afraid of death. We try to keep it hidden. We want to keep it in the closet. Let's not talk about that. But we're all going to die. We're in an entropy. We're in a permanent state of death.
We exist within a Christianized culture that is you're right, totally anti-death, and is into this lie of immortality and is completely divorced from reality. So it is a natural, I think it's just a human natural occurrence to then want to explore the dark side, the stuff that they tell us not to look at, right? The stuff that they say is all gross and wrong and evil. Meanwhile, it's in every aspect of our lives, but don't pay attention to it. Don't even look at it. Don't even think about it. It's not there. It's not happening.
You don't even look at it.
People freak out about it and don't have a natural, balanced relationship with the dark side. If you never explore the dark, then of course you're going to be all messed up. You know,
right? And you're being told to not look at your own shadow. It's your own shadow. You own it. It's yours. This is us. So, you know what I'd like to say is subscribe, like, share. We love the comments. Next week, we're going deeper. I'm going to figure out how to get a set of things.
We'll talk about 3 episodes planned for this series. So the next episode, we're going to dive into the Romanticism and then deeper into the ancient past, Wagner, Vlad Tepes, the vampires, and into the deep culted mysteries, right? And then the next episode, we're going to jump back into the present and we're going to explore sort of the modern goth culture and how it's just everywhere, right?
Where are we at now?
Our moms are reading 50 Shades of Grey on the bus in public.
Yeah, Twilight is bubblegum. It's where we ended up. So, you know, when it's necessary, we got to embrace it. We got to demystify it, you know, so we could be whole beings and, you know, be in love. So, yeah. We'll see you next time. You know, love, blessings to everyone.
Make sure you like and subscribe. Leave us some comments. You know, if we got anything wrong, tell us. We're just 2 dudes who love this stuff and are having fun. And, you know, the goth history is such a long, varied thing. And I'm sure there's like 1,000 people we forgot. So if there are cool artists you think we need to check out that are important, post them in the comments below. We want to hear about them. And thank you guys for tuning in. We love and appreciate you. And we hope we see you guys next week for part 2. And then the following week for part 3. This is going to be a lot of fun. Any last words, Dion, to our audience?
Stay blessed.
Stay blessed. Enjoy life. And don't forget to explore the dark side. Take care, everyone.